Hi everyone, Andrew from WiZDOM here with the fifth video in the What Should I Do Next series. So what we've been working through so far is we started with all of the good considerations that I would recommend that you thought about before even starting to think about sort of what is the right next deal for you. And then progressively from there, we've been building up a person's position and been introducing appropriate deals along the way. Deals that made sense for that financial situation, of course, with reference to where you want to take your property journey and the types of deals that suit you as well. So here we've got to Building Portfolio Plus, where essentially someone has a bit of a property portfolio. They may have done a number of deals to get to this point, and they're now in a situation where they still have great income to be able to generate really good borrowing capacity, and they've been able to build their equity situation up to $500,000. Either, as I said, through doing deals, or alternately, maybe it's just in their principal place of residence and they've had great capital growth and been able to reduce their debt. Either way, they've gone through the getting market ready process and they're now in a situation where that current available equity is there at $500,000 and it's ready to do a deal. Now, it's fair to say that this situation is one of the more challenging. And the reason that I find that is it provides a lot of different options as to where a person can go in their property journey from here. You can really be starting to potentially look at introducing some low-end cash flow without doing too much damage to the manufactured growth strategy deal scope after that. And you can obviously be looking at a whole bunch of really interesting manufactured growth strategies as well. So for me, options is a great thing, but it's also terribly confusing. And so I thought this was a really great position to be able to work through to go, well, there are going to be a lot of options we need to talk about, but what would my recommendation look like, and what would most of the WiZDOM finance strategists and our experienced people talk about and look to do with a person in this situation? So first things first, how about we look at breaking that down? Because most people in this situation, particularly if they've done a couple of deals to get to this point, will absolutely be dying to be doing some cash flow deals at this point to be able to build on their positive cash flow. And I can completely understand why that is the case. Positive cash flow, of course, leads to improvement in lifestyle, but it also has you really working towards being able to give up your PAYG income and have more flexibility about how you spend your time. So I can certainly appreciate why that's really attractive to everyone. But I want to break down why we would need to keep any kind of cash flow strategy low end, and also why it's not necessarily the only good decision that can be made from this situation. So remember, a lot of this is about managing our current available equity to make sure that we can go into a great manufactured growth strategy after that. So let's say, for the sake of discussion, that of this $500,000, we set aside for cash flow a $200,000 current available equity. So of that $500,000, we're going to take $200,000 out of that, and we're going to look at implementing our first cash flow deal. So with $200,000, well, what could we be looking at? What could we be doing? And there's quite a few different deals on the cash flow side of the ledger, which we could be doing, where we're actually going and buying the property. Now, to be fair, they are all relatively low end. But immediately, if we were thinking about that amount of money, which, as I've said previously, $200,000, allowing for stamp duty costs and everything else, would translate to 4 times that when it comes to purchase price. So that would effectively give us a purchase price here of $800,000. So what kind of cash flow deal could we do with $800,000? Well, quite a few. I mean, a few that spring to mind for me is we could be looking at a group of units, either in outer metro locations, in some capital cities, perhaps some large regional towns as well, or even smaller regional towns where we're buying a lot of units all at once. So in a metropolitan location, 800 grand may only buy us a unit or 2, which for my mind, if you did the math on that, probably wouldn't translate to a hugely cash flow positive deal. But if you took that money regionally to potentially some larger regional locations, or even some smaller ones again, for 800,000, you could be buying all the way to 4, 5, or 6 units. And a deal like that likely would mean with more rentable doors, more income, and even once you allow for your financing cost and all of your operational costs, translates to good positive cash flow now and into the future as well. Now, could you also combine that with the likes of a manufactured growth strategy, like a strata deal, strata title, and everything else? Well, yes, potentially you could, but be very careful about the location and about your ability to potentially sell them down. You would really only be doing that to try and increase their value, to extract some of your capital back out, to bring it back into this pool, to then go and do a manufactured growth strategy deal. At an 800 grand price point, a few other cash flow strategies that are probably interesting as well is maybe a rooming house. And a rooming house essentially is where you have one singular home, but you are individually renting the rooms. We introduced that when we were first talking about cash flow strategies, but in that, it was where we were leasing the property and then renting out rooms on an individual basis. In this case, we might be able to certainly look at buying an existing property and convert it into a rooming house by adding more rooms that are rentable, or alternately, we might be adding more bathrooms and other things as well to that property. So it might be a bit of a combination of not just purchase, but also conversion into a rooming house. There is naturally a whole bunch of rules that go along with that, and we've got to make sure that we satisfy all of those. I don't want anyone out there running illegal rooming houses. So certainly from an 800 grand price point, I think that would get us into a lot of very interesting, conversion style of rooming house property deals as well. The last one to mention, and I do feel that this money is a little bit light on from a commercial perspective, but commercial property is always a bit of a go-to and a great long-term strategy when it comes to great positive cash flow. The issue, particularly at commercial at this kind of price point, is that we won't necessarily be buying the interesting commercial property. So because usually deposits are higher in commercial property and your lending ratios are lower, this level of deposit, 200,000, would probably only translate to maybe 3 times from a purchase price rather than the 4 times that you would get in residential property. So what that means is your 200,000 would probably only translate to a $600,000 price point in commercial. Now that's not nothing, but commercial property usually is more expensive, or at least as expensive as a lot of residential property. And of course, that's a function of its income and everything else as well. So would you get into a great commercial deal for 600,000? Potentially not. But again, you could be looking at large regional locations, smaller regional locations where price points are lower, yields are higher, and as a result of that, buy a great commercial property. So one concern for me always, and we manage this always, is if you took that 200,000, would the remaining 300,000 be enough for our manufactured growth strategy? Well, yes, it would be. However, it may be relatively modest. So in the last situation, building portfolio, we were dealing with a $200,000 current available equity, and we spoke about being able to do a modest level of renovation deal, subdivision deal in metro and regional locations around Australia, and that would certainly facilitate us doing that. So without question, leaving 300,000 as our current available equity would probably give us enough money to get into a reasonable level manufactured growth strategy. And so all of those strategies, even doing a cash flow deal, would allow us still to be able to continue to build that capital and move forward in our property journey, which, as I say, is really critical. But in addition to that, there is a second consideration. So really that 300 grand price point is just going to be renovation, subdivision, maybe a knockover and build one property in a pretty reasonable suburb in a metro or large regional area. And so I'm okay with it as a deal to be able to move forward. But it would be really remiss of me not to mention the other opportunity here. And that's that if we delayed doing our cash flow, and as a result of that, so we don't do this deal, and as a result of that, we have all of our $500,000 available for our manufactured growth strategy. Well, what would that mean for us? Well, now we could be looking at some very interesting manufactured growth strategies, both from a price point and then the deal itself as well. Obviously, no matter how much money of this we leave aside, other than all of it, as our strategy cost, it's still going to give us a really healthy deposit to be buying in a very good location or a very good suburb. Again, metro locations right around Australia. So from my perspective, you could be doing a much larger and potentially more lucrative manufactured growth strategy if you chose to leave this capital and just did another manufactured growth strategy at this point. The other types of deals that it would also potentially bring in is we're starting to get to the point where we could consider not just that really high-end reno, really high-end subdivision, in those really good locations. But another type of deal is if we're looking to get into the development path in the future and be developers in the future, that knockover and rebuild space would be really interesting as well. Firstly, we'd be in a great suburb, but additionally, we could be looking at multiple dwellings as opposed to just one. With $300,000, it would be very difficult to both secure a good location from a site perspective and then also be able to have enough deposit to fund a really good construction on that. We'd probably only get to one reasonable house. Well, with this amount of money, we're now getting into a much more high-end house potentially. So you're getting into a great suburb and you are then building more of a luxury home on that to be able to really push on that price point and profitability. Or alternatively, we're talking about multiple dwellings. So it could be a case of you secure a great site and build a duplex, you know, 2 townhouses side by side. It could also potentially push as far as a 3 or 4 townhouse project, but again, it would need to be a very modest location and a very modest build to be able to do that. So as you can see, if we make the potentially difficult decision to continue to delay our cash flow, you know, developments, and instead focused on, now that we've got a really good, healthy level of available working equity for us, or current available equity for us, if we just dedicated that to then doing another manufactured growth strategy and potentially delayed our cash flow deal for another deal, we are opening ourselves to very interesting manufactured growth strategy deals that weren't available to us before. So look, again, hopefully that's really helpful. I know that this is a very challenging situation. It's very hard decisions for people to make that are in this financial situation. Again, it gets back to options are a lovely thing. They're a bit, I refer to them as a blessing and a curse. They're a blessing because you have so many options. It's a curse because you have so many options as well. So I can appreciate this is a very challenging and confusing position to be in with regard to, you know, what you should be doing next and what the right deal is for you. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of clarity on what is available to you and potentially the different ways of going about that and the implications of making those decisions as well. I look forward to bringing you more of these videos in this series. Until then, as always, happy investing and bye.